right, welcome to another episode of Building Wealthy Habits. Today you have myself, Jeremiah Lee, and Randy Barkley. We are talking through some fun issues. Like this one, I think is going to be a good conversation. We are talking through kind of the financial mindset and what steps you should be taking through the decades. So someone in their 20s or their 30s or their 60s, what should you be thinking about? How should you approach money? What's very likely the main push of that decade? So, as most people who listen to this know, I'm in my 40s. Randy's in just early 70s. And so, he has some experience of living through some of these decades. I'm looking forward to these decades, but both of us work with clients on a regular basis that are living through each one of these decades. And even some that are living with their parents through these decades. So looking forward to this conversation. I think it's a great mindset, whether it's good for a listener or even the listener's family members, right? To pass on some of this wisdom.
Yeah, so I think the first level is we talk about the earliest age, and that is the 20s. And when you sit down and talk with somebody in their 20s, and you say, okay, you need to start saving for retirement, they almost you can see their eyes just glaze over.
Yeah,
I mean, there is no interest at all in saving. And of course, a lot of couples or individuals at that age, they don't have the money, the wherewithal. They're trying to keep, particularly if they start out, go to college, they have debt when they come out of school. And there's a lot of factors that are hitting them financially. And they're saying, there's no way that I'm thinking about retirement, right?
Oh yeah, it's a long way away. And things like, having kids, paying for diapers, buying a house, taking a vacation, all those are key things. So I think a lot of the mindset that I think is valuable in this age is not about getting rich. It's about building good, healthy habits. So things like budgeting, things like having discussions with your spouse about how you're spending your money, making sure your spending aligns with what you value. If you value family time, well, then spend money on vacations, spend money doing activities together. If you value content, maybe spend money on entertainment subscriptions or whatever it may be. But I think the biggest thing is, we talk about this in the office, the idea of diversification. People, hey, you have to diversify your portfolio. Well, that's when you're preserving wealth. When you're at this stage in your 20s, man, you want to be concentrating on your career. You want to be concentrating on your abilities. The idea of putting your eggs in one basket, you're the basket. Like you got to get all those things into what you can do, what you can create, what you can accomplish. And so I think the idea of retirement and the idea of diversification, I feel like those are for later decades. I think in your 20s, get some good habits and really, lean into a career, lean into education, learn, all that stuff. So I think making those good steps early. I'm not a big one to say, hey, you have to max out your Roth or you've got to do this for retirement. Maybe good advice, good steps, but everyone I've met in this age group, it's just so far removed from what they're trying to accomplish. I think there's better advice there.
Yeah, obviously you want to spend more time getting a career, and whatever your education is, how that education is going to enhance yourself financially. Obviously money is one of the biggest roots and problems with couples. And the earlier on that you can deal with that and come to a understanding of what's going to happen with this income, how are we going to spend it, what are we going to do to use it, and transparency is so critical, right? I earn, therefore I get. And what about your spouse? Well, wait a minute. Whether or not that you're both working or one's working, the other one's staying home, taking care of children, it really makes no difference. There has to be complete transparency and agreement.
Yep. Yeah. And I think even for folks who are not married in the season of life, like you have some opportunities that you may not have later. For example, we had a client at one point that they got married in their 30s, but in their 20s, the young man, he was an engineer working a great job. He didn't really want to go out. He didn't have things to do with his money. So he just dumped it into retirement, which they're saying it may not be the first thought I have, but he just dumped it in there and was able to build up some good account balances. So when they got married in their early 30s, this woman not only fell in love with him, but then realized, like, you've been providing for our future in ways that I never knew. And once they got married and we're looking at a house and kids, like the ability to max out his retirement kind of dwindled for a few years. But in those years where he was single, making really good money, didn't feel like he needed to blow it on something fun, he just invested it, and it was a great choice. So I guess let's walk forward a little bit. So as you get into your 30s, most people, they have some sort of career, right? They've landed in some profession, either on purpose or just by happenstance they've got there. Some people are married, some people have kids, some people don't. I think that the mindset that I see in your 30s is kind of that these choices you're making are starting to matter more. They're kind of setting you up for the next seasons ahead of you. And so, for example, if you in your 20s were using a lot of credit cards and not really paying attention, well, if you carry that into your 30s, that's going to impact the rest of your life. If you deal with that habit in your 20s and get a handle on your spending, a handle on those things, and you in your 30s you start putting some real healthy habits, you're either building or sabotaging kind of your future self. And I think the same thing goes with health as well. People who are not treating their bodies well in their 30s, they notice it in their 40s and 50s. People who really start taking care of themselves physically in their 30s, man, their 50s and 60s have a whole different light. So I think that idea to say, whatever you're doing is either building or detracting from your future. And I think lifestyle creep is a big one here. You had your first raise, you got a good job, and the neighbor's got a new car, so I think of thinking through what do you really want for you?
So I really like that lifestyle creep. I mean, obviously what you're trying to do, get established, and most people don't have the opportunity just to inherit a house early on. They're trying to put together their economics and determine how they're going to be able to buy their first home. You start talking about children. Having a child is a very expensive proposition right now, much more so than it was for generations past. And I'm not trying to put a damper on couples not having children, because I've got 8 grandchildren, and I'm very excited about all of them. And I can't imagine my life without any of them. So again, I'm not trying to say don't have children if you feel like that's your goal. At the same point in time, you got to plan for it, right? I mean, you're in the midst. You have 4 children. When you look at the economics, it's got to be scary, right?
Yeah. Well, even if I'm in my early 40s now, but thinking back of our 30s, we went from no kids, young married, to 4 kids. A house, a career, all those things, all that happened in our 30s. And it was an adventure in many ways, right? The first time bringing a baby home, trying to, with the 2 of us, because we had a larger family, we have 4 kids, moving to zone defense, and trying to manage that. But yeah, the expense of it, of kids, not just in the diapers and clothes, but school costs, activity costs. And we're still on my wife and I are kind of on the young side as school activities. Our oldest daughter is 12. And so, just finishing elementary school, starting into junior high and high school. And we're starting to see the acceleration of kid activities, sports teams, after school activity teams. And so it's going to get busier, but different busy. It's not going to be as much, physically caring for babies. But this next season, I think we'll be playing taxi a lot with our kids. The costs of, hey, every new activity costs something. But yeah, the 30s was a pretty major transition of trying to keep our heads above water, trying to get our feet beneath us financially as we grew.
And it's all new. I mean, every child brings a new perspective into your household, new demands, new needs, new pleasures, all the things that go with having a child. And again, the 30s is really a wonderful time. And if you're planning for it, it can be something that's highly enjoyable. And again, that transparency, you want to be sitting down with husband and wife and make sure they're both on they're both in agreement that this is what they want to do, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
Anyway.
All right, let's step forward one more decade. We've made it to my decade, this is the 40s. One of the mindsets or the perspective would say it's no longer about growing your wealth. You're starting to think about preserving it. So in the 40s, often people are, they're moving from one house to another,
Right.
What do I do with this equity? They have some equity, not always, but often they'll have some equity. How am I going to preserve this from here to there? Should I leverage this asset to do this thing, right? They're not just trying to build, they're trying to now be strategic and develop things. And often, in your 40s, you've received whatever education and kind of professional skill set that you're choosing to obtain. Often you've already obtained that. And so there's a lot in your life compared to your 30s and 40s that's now decided. So for me personally, like my career is generally decided. I've narrowed down to what I'm doing. My family, we had a moment we said, hey, this is us. There's 6 of us, 4 kids, 2 parents. This is it. This is us. That's kind of decided. So a number of those, the city we live in, all those things, we've made some really good choices, but it's not just about building wealth now. It's kind of bringing forward some of those habits, but we're also starting to think about that idea of diversification, that idea of different streams of income, the idea of how do we protect what we have. I think that's starting to creep in our early 40s, but we're in the midst of that right now.
Right. So again, I think the evolution of your life going from 20s to 30s and now 40s, the economic choices that you've made in your 20s and 30s are going to be realized while you're in your 40s. I mean, good financial choices, decision. And going back to that ugly word that nobody likes to hear about, and that's budgeting. And how you spend your money, if I can control how you spend your money, what you make is really kind of immaterial. If I can control how you spend it, make sure you're aware of how you spend it, the savings and all the other stuff will come about naturally. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's great. And even I think people in their 40s are probably, if their life's kind of moving forward, they have a good career, they've got some promotions, they're happy where they're at, financially as far as their income. You're right. I think there's a lot of people who want to feel rewarded. Hey, 30s was hard. We didn't take enough vacations. I want to take more now. Or right. And that's probably really important. Again, that lifestyle creep again to say, hey, in our 40s, what can we really keep a lid on our budgeting, be strategic? And it's probably a good moment, I would think, 30s also, but I would see in your 40s, that midlife crisis idea, but to take a moment with your spouse and what do we want to be about? Like there's a lot we've already decided, but man, there's a lot ahead of us. What do we want to be doing? So
yeah, how is your life going to work? And again, I think we need to look at from a protection standpoint, what is your life insurance place? I mean, what kind of insurance are you going to have? Your debt, all your other debt, you should have no revolving debt that isn't paid off every single month.
Yeah. When you say revolving debt, right? That's credit cards, signature loans, things like
that stuff. And you should also have an emergency fund. Most people go into the life they're too low as far as available cash. And we recommend about 6 months of gross income needs. So, and for a lot of people, that's a daunting amount. But again, we started that in the 30s. We continue to build it so that they have a liquid base for emergency funds. It really does take the edge off of expenses that come at you all of a sudden, unexpected, but you've got the money. Yep. You've got the money to pay for that. So you keep a solid emergency fund basis to you.
Yep. I think it's such a vital part. Someone in their 20s, the idea of saying you need to get 6 months income tucked away, it just feels impossible, right? 30s is probably hard, but as 40s, you're starting to work towards that. And the reasoning, and we'll talk this more in 50s and 60s, but one of the things in your 50s and 60s is just avoiding some of the bad choices. We're, talking earlier that we've had clients who say, hey, my kids are going to school. I don't really want them to take out loans. I think what I'm going to do is drain my retirement and pay for their college. Isn't that a great idea?
Oh my goodness.
Right. And it's an idea, like, there's a tax filter there. You're going to spend a lot in taxes. Your kids, they have a whole kind of lifetime to pay on loans. If you didn't have a set in retirement, wow, like you're going to be calling them when you're 70 and saying, hey, son, or daughter, I know you're in your 30s trying to establish your family, but I need more. Remember when I paid for your college? It's just a place that most people don't want to be in. And it's a choice that people think, could be good from it. The 50s and 60s, I think, are generally avoiding some of those really bad decisions. So the end of your 40s is, like you said, building up that buffer so that when you have these opportunities or risks in your 50s and 60s, you're prepared for them. You're able to kind of sail into that next decade.
Yeah, and your grandparents, looking back, if you're in your 40s right now, your grandparents typically worked for a company that provided a pension. Now, we're a long ways away from when pensions were readily available for private employers and for employees working for those companies. Now we're entering into the most common contribution plan that you have is a 401k. Now, again, your retirement, nobody's twisting your arm to put money into a retirement. If you're fortunate to work for a company that does make contributions to your retirement, your 401k, it is on your shoulders to make additional contributions. And we try to bring that total to somewhere around 10% of your gross income. If we can start that out earlier rather than later, you'll be able to achieve your financial goals much sooner. But it is so important that you understand that your retirement and at your 40s, it is critically important that you understand how that's going to work for your long-term financial life and success.
Yep. That's so good. I like that. All right, let's take one more step forward. We're in our 40s. Now we're in our 50s. These, for a lot of people, these are your peak earning years. In your 50s, retirement, we talked about your 20s, retirement feeling a long way away. In your 50s, a lot of people, retirement feels like a conversation, right? They're not there
Right.
yet, but it feels like a conversation they're interested in having. Often making good money, sometimes having grandkids. Sometimes in the late 50s, they'll have friends who are starting to retire early.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
that's right. My dad was a fire captain here in Riverside, and 57 is when he retired. That's a very normal age for law enforcement or first responders, those types of jobs. So he retired at 57. He laughed. He's like, I can't just sit on a porch. He started his own business and did some other things. But people in their 50s might start having friends who are retiring for either from pension type public sector jobs, entrepreneurs, things like that. But really, it's a time to kind of double into your retirement. Where do I need to get to? What about retirement to look like? A lot of runway still to say, hey, I need more in my retirement. Let's catch up.
And you got time, right? You're at least 10 years, if not 20 years away from really stepping into retirement. So again, though, at that point in time, you think, well, I'm really close to retirement, particularly if you have a retirement. Now, if you're retiring at 55, it probably means that you're probably working for a publicly, so some kind of public agency, and they're building a pension for you, almost like a teacher. Your father's a firefighter. People were coming out of the county, the state. They typically have a pension that is being provided to them.
Yeah.
So a lot of these people end up with a second career. They retire, but then they go out and get another job doing something else. I see a lot of people from the military. They'll retire from the military early, but then they come into the private sector and they go work another job. So they end up really building multiple sources of income when they finally say we are retired from all things. So there's some opportunities working for the private sector versus the public sector. And when you're leaning into your 50s at this stage, you have to make some critical choices, because a little bit on a monthly basis adds up to a massive amount of money when you're getting close to retirement.
Yep. Also think about business owners. Often they've spent their whole career building, right? And their 50s is probably when they're starting to see that work out, right? Enjoying some higher income and really, taking those moments to lean into good choices, avoiding some of the, big spending, hey, I need a Ferrari, I need a, whatever, even though they could afford it now. It's really making some good choices about who they are and going forward. And it's going to set them up for, their whole section of retirement, I feel like, hinges a lot on what you do in your 50s, right? The choices you make in those 50s.
Yeah, right. We have a whole group of people right now that were able to get a refinance of their mortgage when we had the financial issues going on, but they were able to pick a mortgage that's like 3%. So the question is, do you pay that off or you continue to pay that? And that's really, every household is slightly different. In some cases, I don't like debt. I don't like people walking into retirement and owing anybody anything. In some cases where your mortgage is like 2%, maybe.
Right. It's hard to justify, right? Paying that off early. But those are those choices. Like, do I want to get rid of my mortgage before I retire? If we think about having a second home or something like that, you want to get that established. All those choices, I feel like, are in your 50s. All right, sure. One more step here: 60s. Now we're getting fun.
You're chipping on the block here. You know that.
That's right. Yeah, and so I think that the 60s, kind of the mental perspective, I feel like is a pretty meaningful shift. I think 50s and 40s, they were still in the same boat. It's just the other side of the boat. But once you kind of get to your 60s, I would say one of the items is like, how do I turn my wealth, what I've built, into peace and impact and legacy? I think people start having these bigger choices. I mean, everybody likes financial freedom at any age, but I think in your 60s is when people really say, well, if I could take this wealth and really make it give me some confidence, or really lock in my future, or I want to leave a legacy that goes beyond just me. How can I do that? Like, I feel like those conversations start becoming more real. And maybe just asking you, I mean, when you're in your 60s, were that some of the things you were thinking about?
Again, I was an entrepreneur, so I was building my business. The 60s actually gave me traction because the business had a certain size, had a certain number of just the revenue that was coming in. So it allowed me the freedom to do some things that were in the plan. In other words, I'm very specific about my planning. So I wrote things down where I wanted to go. But in the 60s, you can take the opportunity to put away a lot of money into retirement plans because typically your mortgage, your debt obligations are much less if you've done correctly in your planning, and your income is much higher. So therefore, what you want to do is to take advantage of that and put away as much into your retirement plan as you possibly can. Now, if you're an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, there's some great options out there. It isn't you're not limited to the contributions that if you're an employee with a company, you can
Yeah.
put in a lot more money if you have that opportunity. But that's not really what our subject matter is. What
Yeah.
we're talking about.
No, but it's a good comment. I mean, some people I think feel behind, right? They get to their 60s and think about
Yeah,
retirement and they say, "Oh man." But I think if even if they don't have confidence of where they're planning, if they've been making good choices and moving forward and building and investing in themselves, over these years of building their careers, I mean, 50s, but even their 60s is really good opportunities to lean into things they hadn't in the past. How do we really
right,
set you up for success? We have a number of clients that come in that start working with us in their 60s, and
right.
we kind of get in and do that planning to say, hey, here's the steps we want you to do before you retire, but then really here's what your retirement is going to look like. And that confidence is really, really meaningful. All right. So as we 60s, now we're walking to your generation here, now in your 70s. I mean, you're still early in your 70s, but I feel like the 70s start to have this idea that preservation is greater than growth. Investing stability, accessibility, even purpose and impact. I feel like that becomes a bigger idea. We tell a lot of our clients in this age group, like, you don't have to get rich twice, right? You've
Right.
made it. You've been a good steward of what you have. You've built up good assets. And now we talked before, 20s, it's more concentration. As we've gone through decades, you want to start that diversification. At this point in your 70s, I feel like diversification is kind of the name of the game. Like, we want,
Right.
some value in real estate. We want some in stocks. We want some in bonds. We want even your emotional value. It's not just about, what I do is for work. That's where I get my value from. We're talking about
Yeah.
grandkids and family and friends.
And if we can get a client to hold off taking their Social Security until they're 70, they're going to get a much higher benefit and payout. Plus, it protects the other spouse to a large degree because you've held off. Now, again, a lot of people, they argue with me about, well, why would I want to hold off? I mean, it's available now. So when you reach your full retirement age, you can go continue to work and still receive your Social Security. I'm just saying the benefit is so much greater than what you realize. And they'll say, well, what happens if I die? I said, well, if you die, you die. I mean, I don't want to be morbid, but you've given up the advantage because most likely you're going to live much longer than you realize. So therefore, delaying Social Security benefits to 70 is such. The other aspect that I always want to talk about is that you've got a wealth of knowledge and experience. So when you're reaching into your 70s, how do you use that to enhance the benefit of other people? And retirement to me is you don't just play golf every day. You don't just do all leisure things for yourself. It's benefit. What do you do to benefit other people with the experience that you've had through the years that you've been working and such as that? In retirement, I see a lot of people look at that word retirement and it's their full identity. I said, let's cut that off and let's talk about the transition. What are you going to do going forward to benefit other people, whether it be family, friends, or other circumstances?
Yeah.
But there's opportunities out there, right?
It's so good. And even feeling the weight of still contributing, even though you're not working or someone were retired, to say, oh, it's not like I'm no longer needed, right? I mean, it's such wisdom and experience and finding an outlet for that. And I think boards, charitable organizations, so many of them need leadership. I've been on a few boards where when it comes to like electing the president, it's more of like, well, you have to do it. Not as much an honor that there's real leadership, but really just selecting someone who will try and squeeze it in. But man,
Right.
someone in their 70s who's had great professional experience and a skill set to say, oh, I care about this. I'm going to step in here. I'll be the president of a board, or I'll assist here. That could be so valuable for some of these organizations that really impact community. So I think board leadership is so important, and not I just sit on the board because I had nothing to do, but to really be engaged, I think is so valuable.
Yeah, you're not a placeholder, but you're actually contributing to the outcome of the board.
Yep,
Where you're
that's
trying
right.
to come. And I think also generational impact. So again, my I've outlived virtually all of the generations before me as far as the age they reached, and so again, I think the time that we're in is so different than what it was 50 years ago. And health choices, decisions you make, but also delivery of modern medicine, better understanding the foods we eat. It just has enhanced the life experience, and people are living longer and they're living better. And I think that's changed. So we always go back to the mindset. What happened with my grandparents or my parents? Well, it's different now because we have better knowledge and better implementation of good habits going forward. So
I love that.
anyway.
That's good. And I think even we'll round out as we run out of time, but the 80s, even 90s, if people are given that, hundreds perhaps, if they have that opportunity,
Right.
A lot of it is clarity and organization, knowing there's a next generation coming of saying, what do I want my assets to do? I think of estate planning, get things organized, make some clear directives of how you want this to benefit your family, your community, whatever's left over. And it's a really, I think you can live in confidence knowing I have enough and whatever's left over is going to be used really well by my family. Man, that's
sure.
a great level of confidence. So, well, thank you everyone for walking through the decades with us of, financial mindsets. We'll look forward to joining you or you joining us next week.
Till next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit TrichordAdvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@TrichordAdvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Trichord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.